The sun was setting over the vast Texas prairie, and Martha knelt in the dust outside the old wooden barn. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against the weathered planks, and her breath came in short gasps. She had been holding on to a secret for so long, and the weight of it had become unbearable. Frank stood a few feet away, and his weathered face showed concern beneath the brim of his hat. He had owned this ranch for 30 years, and he had seen plenty of troubles in his time. But something about this moment felt different. Martha looked up at him with tears streaming down her dusty cheeks, and her voice cracked when she finally spoke. "I can't hold it in anymore," she gasped. Frank hesitated, and his hand moved toward the rope that hung from his belt. The silence between them stretched like the endless horizon behind them, and for a moment time seemed to stop. Then he did something that would change both of their lives forever. He knelt down beside her in the dust and placed his calloused hand gently on her shoulder. "Tell me," he said quietly, and his voice was as soft as the evening breeze. Martha had arrived at the ranch 3 months earlier, and she had been running from something, though she never said what Frank had hired her without asking too many questions, because he recognized the look of someone who needed a fresh start. He had seen that same look in the mirror many years ago after he lost his wife Sarah to cancer. The ranch had saved him then, and he believed it could save others too. Martha worked harder than any hand he had ever hired, and she was up before dawn feeding the horses, and she stayed late mending fences. She never complained, and she never asked for anything beyond her basic wages and a place to sleep in the small cabin near the creek. But Frank noticed things, and he saw how she flinched at loud noises and how she kept to herself during meals. He saw how she would sometimes stop in the middle of a task and stare off into the distance with a look of profound sadness. Now, as they knelt together in the dust and Martha began to speak, and Frank listened with the patience of a man who understood that some stories need time to unfold. "My daughter," she began, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "Haven't seen her in 5 years." The words seemed to cost her everything, and she hunched forward as if the weight of them was crushing her. Frank didn't speak, and he just kept his hand on her shoulder and waited. "I made mistakes," she continued, "and I was young when I had her, and I wasn't ready to be a mother. Her father left, and I was alone, and I was working 2 jobs just to keep us fed." Martha wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and left a streak of clean skin across her dusty face. "I started drinking," she said, and the shame in her voice was palpable. "At first it was just to help me sleep, but then it was to help me forget, and then it was just because I couldn't stop. My sister took my daughter when she was 10 and told me I could see her again when I got myself together. That was 5 years ago." Frank felt his throat tighten, and he had known hardship in his life, but he had never known the particular pain of losing a child to one's own failings. "I got sober 3 years ago," Martha said, "and I went to meetings and I got a job and I saved every penny. But every time I tried to reach out to my sister, and she told me my daughter didn't want to see me. She said Emily had moved on and that I should let her be." The name hung in the air between them, and Emily and Frank thought about how much love could be contained in a single name. "Last week," Martha continued, "and I finally got up the courage to write Emily a letter. I poured everything into it, and all the apologies and all the love I never got to show her, and all the years I lost. I sent it to my sister's address and hoped she would give it to her. Today I got a response." Martha's hand shook as she pulled a crumpled envelope from her pocket. "But it's not from Emily," she said, and her voice breaking. "It's from my sister, and she says Emily never lived with her. She says she lied to me all these years and that Emily is in foster care in Oklahoma. She says she didn't think I deserved to know where my own daughter was." Frank felt something shift inside him, in a kind of righteous anger mixed with deep compassion. "And there's more," Martha said, and she could barely get the words out. "The letter has an address, and my sister says Emily has been asking about me. She says she's been waiting for me to come, and that she's 16 now and about to age out of the system." Frank looked at the woman kneeling beside him, and he saw not just her pain, but her strength. She had carried this burden alone for so long, and the weight of it had nearly broken her, but she was still here and still breathing and still hoping. "What do you need?" he asked, and his voice steady. Martha looked at him with surprise, as if she hadn't expected the question. "I need to go to her," she said, "and I need to leave tomorrow. But I don't have enough money saved, and the bus fare alone will take everything I have. And I don't know how we'll manage once I'm there, and I don't know if she'll even want to see me. She looked down at her hands and worn and scarred from hard work. I just know. I can't hold it in anymore, she said. And I can't live another day without trying. Frank stood up slowly and his knees creaking with age, and he reached down to help Martha to her feet. Come with me, he said. They walked together to the ranch house and a modest building that had been his home for 3 decades. Inside, Frank went to an old wooden desk in the corner and opened a drawer. He pulled out an envelope that was thick with bills, and he had been saving for a new tractor, but that could wait. Handed it to Martha, and her eyes went wide. I can't take this, she said. And stepping back, yes, you can, Frank replied, and his voice firm, but kind. This ranch has given me more than I ever needed, and right now it wants to give you what you need too. Martha shook her head and tears streaming down her face again. You don't understand, she said, and I might get there and she might not want to see me. I might have come all this way for nothing. Frank smiled in a sad, knowing smile. Then you'll have tried, he said, and that's what matters. You can control whether she forgives you, and you can only control whether you show up. And showing up is what love does. The words seemed to settle something in Martha, and she took the envelope with trembling hands. Thank you, she whispered, but I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Frank waved his hand dismissively. You already have, he said. And you showed up here broken and you did the work. You got yourself sober and you kept going when it would have been easier to give. That's payment enough. That night, Martha packed her few belongings and Frank drove her to the bus station in the morning. Before she got on the bus, she turned to him and hugged him tightly. You're a good man, she said, and I won't forget this. Frank watched the bus pull away, and he felt the same mixture of hope and uncertainty that he imagined Martha was feeling. He didn't know what would happen when she reached Oklahoma, and he didn't know if Emily would welcome her or turn her away, but he knew that giving Martha the chance to try was the right thing to do. The ranch felt quieter without her, and Frank went about his work with a heaviness in his heart. He thought about Sarah often, and wondered what she would have said about what he had done. He imagined she would have approved, and Sarah had always believed in second chances. 2 weeks passed, and then a month, and Frank heard nothing from Martha. He tried not to worry, but he found himself thinking about her often, and wondering if he had sent her off to more heartbreak. Then one evening, as he was sitting on the porch and a letter arrived, the handwriting was unfamiliar, but when he opened it, he saw it was from Martha. Dear Frank, she had written. I wanted you to know what happened, and you deserved to know. When I got to Oklahoma, I was so scared I could barely breathe. I found the foster home where Emily was staying, and I stood outside for an hour, trying to work up the courage to knock, when I finally did, and a woman answered and told me Emily wasn't home. I thought maybe it was a sign, and maybe I should just leave. But then I saw her walking up the street, and she was carrying a backpack, and she looked so much older than I remembered. For a moment, I didn't think she would recognize me, but then she stopped and our eyes met. She didn't run to me and she didn't smile. She just stood there, and I stood there, and the space between us felt like an ocean. Then she said, Mom, and just that one word, and I started crying. We sat on the steps of that foster home and we talked for hours. She told me about her life and the family she had stayed with and the dreams she had. She told me she had been angry for a long time, but that she had also been hoping I would come. She said my sister had told her I didn't want her anymore and that I had moved on with my life when I told her the truth and when I told her I had been looking for her, and she cried too. Frank, we still have a long way to go, and I know that she's coming to live with me though, and I got a job at a diner in town and am renting a small apartment. It's not much, but it's a start. She asked about you and I told her about the ranch and about your kindness. She said she wants to meet you someday and she wants to thank the man who helped her mother come back to her. I don't have the words to tell you what you've given me. Frank, you gave me more than money, and you gave me hope. You gave me the courage to believe I deserved a second chance. I will never forget that, with love and gratitude. Martha. Frank read the letter 3 times, and each time feeling the tightness in his chest ease a little more. He walked out to the barn where Martha had knelt that evening, and he looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Sarah, he said quietly, and I think I did okay. The ranch settled into its evening rhythms, and the horses nickering softly and the wind rustling through the grass. Frank thought about all the broken things in the world and all the people,